Just this week, in the face of its funding crisis, UNRWA was celebrating the start of the academic year and the reopening of its schools. Girls arriving for class in the Jalazon refugee camp in the occupied West Bank, welcomed by the agency's chief. UNRWA has been scrambling all year to drum up the money to maintain its services after the US withheld more than $300 million in funding. Now comes confirmation that those cuts are permanent. The US State Department saying the fundamental business model and fiscal practices that have marked UNRWA for years, tied to UNRWA's endlessly and exponentially expanding community of entitled beneficiaries, is simply unsustainable. The United States will no longer commit further funding to this irredeemably flawed operation. For the Palestinian leadership, the decision is not about the specifics of a UN agency, rather an attack on the Palestinian cause.
The US may argue that it's taxpayers' money and they are free to do whatever they want to do with it, yes, but who gave them the right to approve the stealing of my land, my future, my aspiration, my hopes, my capital, my Aqsa Mosque, my Holy Sepulchre Church? They have no right whatsoever.
For Palestinians, the final status of the more than 5 million refugees who assert a right of return to present-day Israel is, like the status of Jerusalem, an issue to be settled by negotiation, not by a preemptive US position. That position is referred to, at least in the language used in the US statement when it talks about the exponentially expanding number of people who rely on UNRWA. That suggests this isn't just a move against one specific agency, but also against the continued refugee status of millions of people. For the Safi family, home is the village of Beit Nabala, now in Israel, not the Jalazon refugee camp where most of them were born and raised.
What can I do if I go back on my own? I can't tend the land. I want my children there before me. We want them there. The future is theirs and their children's.
Yusra Safi has 70 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Among Israeli Jews, there's all but political consensus that allowing all such families to return would destroy the Jewish character of the state. But there's also concern, not least reported within the Israeli security establishment, about the effects of killing off their main provider of aid in order to disrupt the politics.
But I think people are asking whether what we're seeing is the political instrumentalization of aid. And what we say is that the vulnerability and the needs of the people are simply too great.
In the short term, UNRWA will continue to seek ways to plug its funding gap, Germany among the first donor nations to promise extra money, warning of an uncontrollable chain reaction if UNRWA were forced to shut down. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Jalazon refugee camp in the occupied West Bank.